Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Anime Go-Go Watcher. Before the video starts, if you guys want to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/animegogowatcher and enjoy the video. For today's video, we're going to be going over some of the strongest swords in the whole world of One Piece. Now before we get into it, let's talk about the Meito and what that means. Now, the Meito is the grade of the sword, and there's a few variables that go into it. It is altogether its fame, whether it be by whoever made the sword or whoever wields the sword. Both kind of intertwine and make up the grade of the sword. So if you take someone like Whitebeard, for example, his Cloud Cutter ended up in the supreme grade of 12 Wazemono swords, and you can see why, because the guy was a Yonko. Now, as the anime is dipping its toes into the Wano arc, there are a few new swords that are coming into the picture, and if you haven't read the manga, you might not want to listen. But without further ado, let's get into some of the strongest and most famous swords in all of the world of One Piece. So with this story being told, I won't be going into any of the regular graded swords or any of the skillful grade swords, but I will be talking about some of the great grades and the supreme grades. So the first sword we're going to be talking about is Susui. Now, Susui is one of the 21 Wazemono grade swords and was once wielded by the legendary samurai Ryuma. Now, it's prized as the national treasure of Wano country, and we're getting into that arc, so we'll be able to see a little bit more as time goes on. If you're a manga reader, you have a pretty good idea. But after his death, the katana was buried with him until his grave was robbed by Gecko Moria 23 years ago. Now, he returns as a zombie in Thriller Bark, who had been given Brook's shadow, and later on in that arc, he's defeated by Zoro. Once he was defeated, Ryuma bequeathed the sword to Zoro and said he was satisfied with Zoro as the sword's master. Now for me, this is one of the coolest swords throughout the whole anime, and the biggest reason is because it's one of the few black blade swords. But as the anime continues and as the manga continues, we get into the Wano arc, and a lot of convincing took place, but by the end of it, Zoro decided to leave his black blade and replace it for Enma. Now Enma was a sword that was wielded by none other than Oden himself. Now, Oden wielded two swords, Enma and, I might say this wrong, Yabakiri. Now Yabakiri was given to Little Momo. Now the crazy thing that makes Enma so powerful is that it's the only weapon known to have harmed Kaido, the Yonko. Yeah, I'm talking about that guy. The same guy that's tried to commit suicide, fallen off a Sky Island, has been imprisoned by Marines and been sentenced to death in multiple manners. That guy. Now, according to Hitetsu, if Zoro were to succeed in making Enma a permanent black blade, the sword may increase in rank. Yeah, you heard me. Suggesting that it may become a Saijo Wazemono. Now, getting a little bit into Enma, it's shown to be an extremely difficult to wield sword, with Oden being the only one ever to tame it. This is because Enma's distinct quality to draw out its wielder's Ryu, which is its haki. Now it does this in far more excessive amounts than normally intended. So for a normal swordsman, yeah, you better bet you'd be dead. You'd be a dry husk on the side of the road after you swung this sword once. But anyways, after Zoro wields it, he decides to cut off a side of a tree and ends up cutting off a whole cliffside. But after it did that, it ended up emaciating most of Zoro's arm. However, as Zoro demonstrates with enough force of will, one can force one's haki to flow back from the blade. So he kept his arm. Now another sword we're going to talk about is the Kitetsu. Now there's a few of them which were all crafted by Kotetsu. Kotetsu is the ancestor of Hitetsu, which is that old guy in the mask with the really long nose in the anime that just showed up last few weeks. So we don't really see much of this sword besides Luffy throwing around fists and acting like he's using the sword, which to much disgrace of the sword, Zoro like freaks out all over the place because of it. But after a while, we don't see much of it, and then it gets returned as the manga continues, so all around, we know it's a cursed blade, but nothing else about it. One of the last swords we'll talk about on the Owazemano grade list, which is the 21 grade swords, is Wado. Now, this is the one that's been with Zoro the longest. This is the one that you see in a lot of the flashbacks when he's a little kid, and it's the one that sad scene is where the father of his close friend gives it to him after she passes away. But we see a lot of it throughout the series, and we see how much stronger it gets as Zoro wields it and as it develops with him throughout the series, and he's remarkable with the sword. But continuing on, let's go ahead and talk about some of the Supreme Grade 12 swords. So of these 12 swords, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of some theories that I have behind what swords we haven't seen yet. But for most of it, let's talk about the 3 that we do know. So we do know about the sword that Whitebeard had, that big long staff that he was able to fight throughout the Marineford War, and he also fought against Shakes and they split the clouds, right? That's what they called it, the Cloud Cutter. But I feel like you don't really get to see too much of this sword being used because, you know, Whitebeard was just so strong, and how he used the sword, which he was phenomenal when he used it, and you got to see a lot of acrobatics when he used the sword, but you don't see it used in the traditional sense of what a sword really is used for. But going into it, let's talk about one of the swords that's not as well known, but it's on the grades of the 12 grades, is the Kitetsu, which was the first sword made on the list of Kitetsu swords. Now, not much is known about it, but I have a little theory of where this sword is and who it belongs to. Now, I think it's the Gorosei. So I think it's the old guy that's the bald guy and he has the white cloth. I think he's the one that wields the Kitetsu sword. I hope it to be true because that would really mean that that guy has some crazy power behind him, but we'll just have to wait and see to see if that's confirmed, if he ends up having the sword or not. Now, one of the biggest and most well-known swords is Yoru, and that's the one that's wielded by Mihawk. Come on, you gotta know who this guy is. Now, Yoru is also a black blade, which already makes it sick as hell, and it's 7 feet. Like, what? So most of this blade, you get to see a lot of it being demonstrated in the Marineford arc when Mihawk was at the war, and like one of the craziest things you see at the beginning is when he cuts the iceberg in half. Like, that was mind-blowing. Along with that, you see him fighting against Luffy, and then every single one of his slashes is just like a ki blast, which one of the slashes, a Marine in the manga calls it the world's strongest slash. Like, it's insane. But as the story continues, hopefully in the Wano arc, we'll get an idea of a few more of those swords, and we'll get shown some more of the higher grade swords and who they're wielded by. But with that, that's going to end today's discussion. Thank you guys for listening. If you guys have any questions, leave it down in the comment. If there are any videos you guys want me to talk about or do some research on, let me know. But take care.